Good morning, team. Dave Kidder, associate broker, Keller Williams Fresno, and lead agent on Kidder and Associates. So I want to do a quick video to help my team preparing the listing. So I'm going to go right into Realtors Property Resources, or RPR. What I like about it is I can find the property quickly. It gives me a lot of information about the property, and the really cool thing is it connects right directly into Zipforms. So all I need to do is click on the tab. It's going to open up Zipforms for me, and I'm going to select listing and hit OK. Now, while it's uploading, I want to take us over to .loop so I can get our templates, the checklist on the forms that we're going to use while filling out our forms. And the checklist is nice because this way I don't miss any forms to take with me on the listing presentation. So we're going to go through these a little bit more detail, but as you can see, I hit templates, and then this is going to open up the listing checklist. And since it's updated frequently, I don't bother downloading it. I just get it fresh every time, so I know exactly what forms I'm going to need. So the ones that I'm going to focus on are actually the forms out of Zipforms. So everything that has the arrow next to it are the forms that I'm going to want to get and make sure that I take with me on my listing presentation. So, and we're going to go through these so you can follow along. If you need any help finding this form again, just let me know. But again, it's in .loop in our market center. And if you're at another market center, I'm assuming you have a checklist. If you don't, here's a checklist that works really well. So again, we're going to go into these in more detail. So once I have Zipforms open, I'm going to complete the seller information. Now, RPR usually brings all this information over. This is a weird one because this home just sold and the old seller's information is still in here. So I'm going to remove them and insert some test names. So we have Sam seller, and of course we're going to have Sally seller here pretty quick. And I like making sure that I have as much contact information. I've gone ahead and put my email address in here just for this test, but having their emails is very helpful down the road. So once we have this set, we're going to go into documents, and the first document we're going to focus on is the cover sheet. Now, if I fill out the cover sheet completely, a lot of the information is going to be brought over into the listing. And it's also a nice checklist for when I'm sitting down with the seller. I can go out through and ask important questions that not only going to help me fill out the forms correctly, also when I'm doing my marketing, other information about the home, I'll have that home already right there. So once I have my checklist done, let's go back into Zipforms, and I want to review to make sure I have all the forms in here. Now, again, I've applied a template to the form, which I've created ahead of time. With this checklist, though, I can go through and just select the forms that I need. So, as we go into this, you see there are a lot of forms that probably would be best to take with me with the listing. But one of the forms I want to show you where it's at. It's the earthquake form, and as you can see, there's a lot of different directories in there, but this is hiding under the California EPUBs, and there's several forms in here. There's the earthquake and the homeowner's guide to earthquake prevention. So this is where I would get those random forms, which we're going to need with the listing. They're just not in the regular menu. So let's go back over to our cover sheet. And you can see I mark where they're going to sign, which is convenient because it goes through on the form. It'll put a little red X next to where they need to sign. So hopefully we don't miss any signatures that we have to come back for. So as I go through, so this listing we're going to start on November 5th. We're meeting with them on Monday to sign the listing, and I'm going to have my listing expired July 1st. So I go through, I put the listing price that we're going to go for. If I have the loan balance, this is helpful to have. Again, this is something I want to ask the seller when I'm sitting there, talking with them. If there's a first, there's a second. Also, this is a great place to catch, are there any other liens? Are there any other bills against the house that we need to know? And two, primarily, it may be solar or some kind of filtration system that they're making payments on. If they're owned, free and clear, all the better. So I go through here, and now you can see, I think a lot of times we make a mistake. We have our favorite people that we want to use, and yet really it's the seller's choice on title, on pest, on home warranty, and they have a choice. I give them options. They almost always come back and ask me, who do I use? But I always want to present them with at least 3 options. So let's get into the listing itself. Of course, the very first form that we're going to deal with is the agency disclosure. And in here, again, I'm not going to go into great depth, although we need to be able to explain this to our client, that with a listing, we are representing the seller exclusively when we initially take the listing. Now, if we or somebody from our office brings the buyer, now we enter into dual agency, and we need to be able to explain this to the seller that at the time of the listing, we are seller, we are representing the seller exclusively, and yet there is a chance that we could be in dual agency. I hope you all understand what dual agency means, and this is where I think getting to contract strategy or getting in front of your coach is so important, that if there's a chance that you're going to be in a dual agency, you really need to have a clear understanding of what that is. Let it be said, and here's a great definition, is that if I am representing the seller, I'm a fiduciary to them, and it requires the highest level of loyalty and trust that I can give to a client. So we're going to go through the agency. Of course, they're going to sign here, and at the time when somebody brings an offer, we need to show this agency disclosure to the other party. So we're going to scroll past this. First page is where we sign. The second page, of course, has all the civil code of what defines what agency really is. Now, there's no signature on the second page. The second form is, of course, the possible representation of more than one buyer or seller. And this may be common sense, and yet we need to make sure our sellers know that we very possibly could be representing other sellers and other homes that might even be competing against them in the same neighborhood. And they need to understand that that is the case. They also need to understand that as we're working with buyers, we may be representing buyers who we may be showing their home to and other listings to. They need to just understand our relationship with them. Our intent is to sell their home, and yet we could sell somebody else's home. Now, this is a disclosure, and I don't know if people really understand this, is that in negotiations, that when we're presenting offers from buyers, we actually retain the right to disclose details of those offers to our client and to other people in an effort to obtain the highest and best offer that we can. The buyer can actually ask that we sign a confidentiality agreement, and yet if I am presented with something like that, I don't know how strong their offer is all of a sudden. Anyway, that's a great discussion for class, but I wanted to point that one line out, that when we're presented offers, we as agents have the right to share that information to other buyers. So let's get into the listing itself. Of course, in the upper left hand, it's the date we prepared. This date is consistent throughout the contract. Whenever we have a document that we sign, we want to say, okay, listing agreement dated November 3rd. Has nothing to do when it's accepted. It just has to do with when we prepared the offer. So top line, you see Sam and Sally. You see Keller Williams as the broker here. The time frame of the listing, and it's important that we have a start and a finish to the listing time. We also have to have a price, which we have in here. So we have all the other information here. this is not a manufactured home, nor is it part of a probate or conservatorship. So if we have either one of those, we have to mark that. This is a pretty straightforward listing we have going on here. Price $320,000. If I have anything special about the listing, if there's any other terms in this case, the seller's gonna sell their property and hold it for an exchange. I want to spell it out right up front. Remember, on commission, it is negotiable. My preference is to leave it blank until I'm negotiating. Some people will put a commission in, and then if they negotiate something different, they'll scratch that out. You need to make sure you initial it, though, if that happens. So down on under paragraph 3, B, or A, I'm sorry, it's what's known as the safety clause. And here, after the listing, on the day the listing expires, I'm to present the seller with a list of people who have looked at the house, and if any of those people come back after the listing has expired, for the time period inserted in here, is they will still owe us a commission. And it's important to explain that to the seller, that this only protects us on the people that we actually were the procuring cause and we're responsible for showing them the property. Now, also, these paragraphs are very important on what the seller's responsibility is to maintain the property and make it available for us. In fact, if they make it impossible for us to show the property, they could still owe us a commission. And again, I'm not going to go into depth. This is a great question. If there's any question on this, we make sure that we have you get together with your coach. Also, contract strategy. This is the kind of question that we love to hear, and Jennifer loves to field these kind of questions. So there may be other fees that the seller is willing to pay, or we could put in here. One could be if we ask them to pay for photographs or staging, something we would outline it here. Now, this is where we negotiate what we're going to pay the selling agent. Our policy is to pay them at least half of the commission that we collect. You may find in a property where we want to attract buyers, we may even offer to sell the other, or pay the other agent more money, a higher commission. I've done that before, especially on land. I'll pay them a higher commission than what I collect. So, as we finish up the first page, is we want to make sure that they don't have any other listing with any other broker at the time, and that they have the right to sell the house. And this shows if there's any other obligations. As we move on to page 2, we'll start covering the items that are excluded from sale. And this would be a great time to address things like the nice chandelier that they want to take with them, or if there's any appliances. If they're willing to leave appliances, make sure that the appliances that are in the home when you start showing are what's going to be left. You might even spell it out here exactly what it is that the sellers are going to take with them, down to serial numbers. We're going to talk about items that are leased that need to be included and disclosed to the buyers. So both leased and liened items, and it spells them out here what those might be. Now, we want to make sure that the seller knows that we're going to include their listing in the Fresno area multiple listing service, or if this is we could also include here the CRMLS. We want to make sure that they understand that that's where we're going to be advertising the property, marketing the property to other agents. And right below that is the benefits of using the MLS. And I hope that you all understand what the advantages are. Take some time and read through this. This is part of our value proposition of being realtors and being members of the Fresno Area Multiple Listing Service. Here are the things that we represent. I saw a listing just this week where it is not being promoted through any multiple listing service. The agent's promoting it themselves. What a disservice they're doing to that client. The client needs to understand that. As you see, they need to sign right below this paragraph, as well as initial at the bottom of the page. Actually, it's initials both places. So you'll need both initials at the bottom of page 2, And now let's move on to page 3. So I want to point out right at the top of the page that within 2 days of taking the listing, we're submitting it to the MLS. This is not only an office requirement, this is also the MLS. And there are fines that go along with it for not submitting in a timely manner. There's, again, there's a clause for seller excludes or elects to exclude from the MLS. And if I mark this, I'm going to have them sign an SELM, seller elects to exclude from the MLS. This also is a form that we'll use if we take the listing on, say, Tuesday, but the seller doesn't want it to go active for another week. So if there's going to be any delay after taking the listing, we want to have them sign the SELM. So as I'll find it, this is how you find it in the form. You just use the initials that they show in all of the Zipforms. If you just type in the actual initials they show, you'll find the form fairly quickly. You don't have to type in the whole name. Now I want to point here, as you see here, the seller can also elect not to have our property sent out to third-party vendors, Zillow, any of the 350 different websites we promote to. The seller can say, I don't want my property marketed to those off sites, and I only want it on the MLS. So they would sign here, and I know several brokers who do not allow their listings to go to Zillow. And again, our policy is to syndicate to those sites, and yet if you have a client that says I don't want to, they can elect out here. Make sure you talk with the MLS though, and make sure that they understand that exactly what is being conveyed here. MLS is pretty good at catching this, but if the seller is adamant about that, I want to make sure that they understand. So as we move on down, again, take time to read that. If you have any questions, a great question to ask it. Contract strategy. So on paragraph 6, where the seller represents that they have no knowledge of any other notices of default or anything else that's going to be coming against the property to encumber it. Here, this spells out both the broker's and the seller's duties. This is a great thing to really make sure you understand, because under the broker's duties, it's actually is our value proposition. And under the seller duty, it says, if we're going to list the property, you're going to make the property available to us. Where you might run into this is where if they have a tenant in place, is if there's going to be an issue with the tenant, discuss it before you take the listing. I've seen a lot of tenant occupied properties that have gone really, really bad because the tenant didn't even know the property was set for sale. So here's also some options where the seller may elect to get inspections ahead of time, and I think it's a good idea to get the pest and the roof ahead of time. They're relatively inexpensive. The roof is free. The pest inspection is $75 to $100. But to have those done ahead of time, you can short stop or maybe even forestall any issues, you'll be forewarned if there's any problems that might come up on the property. So it talks again about the agency relationship, which we went over in the agency disclosure earlier, and yet here it spells out again what could possibly happen in the case of an agent bringing an offer from our company, or even an agent that brings an offer from another company. The duties and the agency is spelled out there, along with the possible representation of more than one buyer or seller. Again, it's spelled out in the listing. So we're on to the next page, and here under the security, insurance, and showings, is it spells out and discloses to the seller their liability, responsibility of what insurance will, what insurance they should maintain on the property. Also talks about audio and videos of the property, that we cannot control who takes pictures. although the seller may ask that no pictures be taken, we can disclose that to the other agents, and yet we really don't have any control of that. And again, talks about photographs, the fact that it's going to be marketed online. We have no control once the pictures go online of what are done with those pictures. And yet, we as their fiduciary, we follow their instructions. We will have a lockbox on the property as well as a sign. Paragraph 14, we talk about equal housing opportunities, that we follow and comply to those and make sure that if the seller has any questions on that, let's make sure we get a copy of equal housing opportunity, the guidelines and pamphlets there, so they understand exactly their liability and their responsibility in making the property available to everybody. In the case of attorney fees, there's a line here. And now under additional terms, items, if this home were a foreclosure or it was a short sale or even a trust, we would mark here, and those additional forms would automatically be brought in. Paragraph 17, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, is that even if you go out and take a listing, if our broker looks at it and says, we don't want this listing, it's the broker's responsibility, it's the broker's listing, and they have the right to decline any listings that we may take. And it could cover anything from commission to the type of property it is to any number of things. So if you have any questions or not, whether a listing is going to be accepted, run it by our brokers ahead of time if there's anything out of the ordinary. This page we talk a little bit about additional mediation and terms. In the case of the listing, the mediation covers between the seller and the broker. It has nothing to do with the other party. And this is the signature page. Here on paragraph 21, ownership and title, that this is where they declare they have the right to sell the property, and it's right above their signatures. So the seller will sign here. You as the listing agent will sign. And again, there's like additional signature addendum. If there are more than one, if there are more than two sellers, you would have them sign that. The seller advisory. Again, this discloses and shows the seller all their rights and responsibilities. It also gives them an idea of the disclosures that we're going to be asking them to disclose on their property. It talks about death on the property. What you see here, withholding tax, the marketing considerations, that it might be wise to have the property in good shape before you actually sell it, the reports that you might want to get prior to selling, what happens after the sale of the property, and talks about the safety and precautions of what you want to deal with as your property is being sold. And finally, it talks about who's responsible for the expenses should there be repairs or anything. That it's not the broker's responsibility to pay for repairs of the property. Finally, again, is the signature page where the seller will sign. You as the listing agent will sign here. So now that I have the listing, all the documents for the listing prepared through Zipforms, I want to show you, I want to take you back to Zipforms and show you how to print everything off. So we're going to go back over to Zipforms. And from here, I'm going to hit the print icon, center part of the screen. And again, I have my checklist out, so I'm going to follow through my checklist. Everything that is going to be required, I'm going to go ahead and print it off of here, including the cover page. Once I do this, then I come right back up, I hit print, or continue. And while that's printing, You see it's a number of pages. Now I want to go back and, following my checklist, I want to go back to those forms that are not part of Zipforms, the property profile, the CMA, and the net sheet. I want to show you where to get the first two. So let's go to property profile. So I go in, I open up the listing, and I scroll down to the APN link, click on that, and it's going to open up a website called CRS. And in CRS, the very front page, I just print this entire page off. I'm going to have my seller initial this page. The nice thing is it does show the owners, what they paid for it, what the taxes are on the property, which is what we want. Again, I'll print this off. And now the CMA, and there's so many different CMAs that you can take for ease of preparing for the listing. I like to go to RPR. And here it shows what the RPR value is right now. It also reflects what we're listing the home at. I hit the print icon. And there we have it. We have that printed off. As far as the net sheet, there are so many different title companies, lenders who will do net sheets for you. I'm not going to really go into preparing a net sheet right now, but you're going to need that for the listing presentation. Anyway, this is Dave Kidder with Kidder and Associates. Thank you for watching, and if you have any questions at all, there's my email there. If you have any suggestions for future videos, love to hear from you. Again, Dave Kidder signing off. Appreciate your time. Thanks.